Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge country. I pay my respects to the Gumatj, and thank you very much for hosting us here today. For those who have been here for the past 3 years, this is our third year, and you're probably asking, well, why isn't this group already supported and why isn't this rolling out? I'm asking the same questions, but we'll get there. I'm quite confident that we're on track and we're heading in the right direction. I'd also like to acknowledge our Empowered Communities leaders that are here with us today, and acknowledge their fellowship over the past 2.5 years as we've developed this proposal up. It is through their fellowship and through their strength that I've been able to continue to chair this group and really continue to drive the Empowered Communities initiative. I'd like to acknowledge the organisation that I work for, the Dark and Jung Local Aboriginal Land Council, my board members that are here today, the Empowered Communities Leadership Group and the Empowered Communities Regions don't receive any funding in regards to driving this initiative. It is the organisations taking the lead, backing the leadership and supporting the leadership to be able to go out and do this work. And that's a commitment that we made up front within our organisations, is to look at how do we drive this and take ownership of this as Indigenous leaders within our own community. So thank you to my board and to Dark and Jung Local Aboriginal Land Council for its continued support. In the 2 years since, we started this journey in 2013 with bipartisan political support and a public announcement of the support of the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. In the 2 years since, then we have developed a comprehensive report setting out a policy framework and practical steps for achieving Indigenous empowerment in our regions. We delivered the report to the Commonwealth, State and Northern Territory governments in March this year. We have not waited for a government response to act locally in the 8 regions, and as stated by Minister Scullion at last night's event, we want you to take our job, the job of government. Empowered communities are ready to take that job. All organisations and all regions have opted in voluntarily to the Empowered Communities reforms, and that is the first principle in regards to our forms, that it is on an opt-in basis. No one is forced to participate. Our aim is to support and empower the individuals and families who live in our regions and communities to take responsibility for their own lives and futures, and we will work with governments who want to work with us. We are determined to support Indigenous people, and in particular our children, to achieve in education, employment and home ownership in the way that most other Australians' families take for granted. We are supported by Jarwin and corporate partners who are members of Jarwin. This support, either on the ground through secondis or as advice from senior business people, has been crucial to our work so far. And to date, we have 4 intakes per year, 6-week intakes, where secondis come out to our regions, live in those communities and work within those organisations to continue to assist us in driving the necessary reform. As Empowered Communities leaders, the things that we most want to achieve in our regions sound simple, and they should be simple. We want all Indigenous kids in our region to go to school and learn, study and be supported by their parents while doing this. Capable adults getting into and retaining their fair share of the jobs, having access to good training opportunities and being prepared to take up these opportunities and realise the benefits to them and their families. Communities where the crime rate is low, drugs and alcohol do not dominate so many lives, and residents can walk around feeling safe in their homes and streets. Family-oriented homes that are cared for, where rent is paid and where they aspire to their own homes one day. And what a fantastic aspiration to have, home ownership. These are important milestones that most Australians expect for their kids and themselves as a matter of course. It can take an effort and hard work, and when people feel empowered, they take responsibility and strive to achieve these things. In many of our communities, now it has become more complex. A heavy reliance on welfare and government to deliver services that should be the responsibilities of families and individuals has created difficult dependencies and disempowered many of our people. The challenge for our regions is clear, but the solution is not simple. It is not a simple matter of government setting the priorities and rolling out a few new programs or services to fix the problem. It is not just a matter of governments placing more of their own people with more authority in our regions to solve the problem, however well-intentioned and helpful they might be. For lasting change to be achieved and stick, it has to be driven by Indigenous people themselves in places and communities where Indigenous people live. Past experiences have demonstrated that many government-driven, top-down Indigenous reforms will be lucky to outlast a change of government. They will rarely connect in a way that builds trust with people who need services, let alone provide the long-term, consistent effort required to break through the issues we face in our regions every day. These are the issues that we have grappled with in our report of empowered communities and empowered peoples for the past 2 years. We accept that governments want to see better outcomes for our people, as we do. We know intentions are good, but governments are driven by the need for short-term political gains demonstrated by quick wins without the backup to make any short-term gains last. In the end, this fails when the huge efforts and attention that is put in the start wanes over time. Government personalities change, public servants change, and people both sides walk away without consequences. Our lasting benefit to the people and the reforms were meant to help. Our report sets out a long-term, holistic plan for change. Our model is dependent on Indigenous people, governments and corporates working together in a complementary way, each playing their particular strengths, learning from and supporting each other. We have developed a guide or a method for Empowered, and it recognises first, Indigenous individuals and families need to be supported to understand their responsibilities and values, the benefits from education for their kids, getting into jobs, and making sure that the places where they live are safe. This is what we expect as all Australians. Second, they need to empower themselves by taking all appropriate and necessary responsibilities for their own lives and futures. Governments need to stop overreaching into the day-to-day lives of our people, and our people need to start taking responsibility for our own lives. Third, governments need to empower Indigenous people by sharing and sometimes relinquishing some of their responsibilities and resourcing Indigenous people to assume these responsibilities. Our goal is to achieve social, economic and cultural development for the Indigenous people of our regions. And the best example of this is this festival. It achieves economic outcomes, it addresses social issues that are happening right across the country, but it is absolutely immersed in culture. And that is critical to our future as Indigenous people. Closing the gap on the Indigenous disadvantage and ensuring the maintenance and preservation of our culture, heritage, languages for future generations. We want to draw on the lessons of international development rather than be stuck in the usual social policy framework of governments. Governments have an important role in the Empowered Communities model, but our report seeks a different role to the one that they traditionally and currently play. We don't need governments to take over the lead in our communities and regions. We need governments to back us, to lead and to assist with breaking through critical system barriers in a way that enables us to lead more effectively on the ground. And governments need us to lead in this way. Otherwise, we are doomed for more of the same old, same old. We know that government expenditure of over $30 billion a year is attributed by the Productivity Commission to Indigenous Australians. We don't see the evidence of this amount of spending on the ground in our regions and our communities. Our report seeks to get to the heart of these issues. We have no way of knowing whether the overall amount is too much or too little. And you probably asked the question as to how we don't know that. The simple reason is we don't have control of that. What we do know is that it has to be able to be used more effectively. Our report proposes some straightforward financial reforms that would enable us to achieve greater productivity from available resources and opportunities over time. First, we would like greater transparency over government funding coming into our regions, so government and Indigenous reform leaders have the same knowledge. Secondly, we want to work with governments on more flexible funding arrangements for our regions that enable us to better target and tailor support to our people who need it, and move quickly to course correct if necessary. Thirdly, we want to explore the options for Indigenous organisations to be co-purchasers and purchasers of services within their regions. Indigenous service providers are very directly accountable to the people receiving the services. There is no hiding behind distance. These are incentives that will help motivate more Indigenous organisation and people to opt into the reform and stick with it. While governments take time to consider our report, we are planning and acting on first priorities. We plan to demonstrate in a very practical way to our own people and to governments why empowered communities is such an important opportunity. In the first year of implementation, we intend to build on the work that we have already been doing in our regions to restore social norms or values. Across our regions, we are focused on this sort of reform for some time. For example, in the Cape York, parents have saved over $2 million to support children's school expenses through the Student Education Trust. In inner Sydney, the Clean Slate drug program has significantly reduced crime with a reduction in arrests from 114 per month, 67% Indigenous. So it's 114 per month, 60% Indigenous, to one Indigenous person dealing with crime last year. In the East Kimberley, a transitional housing model has supported families who want to leave welfare and housing to get their kids into good schools and themselves into good jobs, while having the security and safe affordable housing and a pathway to home ownership. We have demonstrated our reforms bona fides through the actions such as these, and there are many more examples across our regions. Partnering with other Indigenous organisations in our regions and with governments through empowered communities will enable us to take this further. Already preparation for this first priority has commenced in many regions. Inner Sydney, with the support of Minister Scullion and others, is progressing the Pemulwuy affordable housing and commercial precinct. This important empowered communities priority will provide safe and affordable housing for 62 Indigenous families, a good base from which to get their kids to school and secure employment. In Goulburn, Murray and Victoria, empowered communities, with the support of the Victorian Government and others, is scaling up its employment and economic development focus. They will reap the opportunities for local Indigenous people from planned development in the area. And in my own region, the Central Coast of New South Wales, we have done significant work in reducing the threats of drug and alcohol, especially in the areas of ice. Darkinjung Land Council this year went from an organisation that generated no income to this year generating over $10.5 million in income, building 5 homes for our community that were fully funded by our organisation, with a commitment from my board that we will build 6 more homes this year for our own community under an affordable housing program and not a social housing scheme. These are only a few examples of the first priorities empowered communities regions are progressing. They are all aimed at empowering families and individuals to step up with support and to take the necessary responsibility for managing their own lives and futures. As a united group of empowered communities, organisations, regions and communities, we can achieve a lot for our people. We can achieve even more in partnership with governments and corporates. We believe we have a good plan, the right plan set out in our report. As I said earlier, we will work with governments that is prepared to work with us, but we will not wait idly by for governments to respond to our report. The change we seek is not simple and cannot be achieved with well-intentioned business as usual, by governments or by us. We are confident that the Empowered Communities provides the way to act quickly, to scale up success around the fundamental social norms, and to ensure the gains for the Indigenous people in our regions are lasting. We have copies of the Empowered Communities report with us, so for those that haven't seen it, we've got 50 copies up front, and we'll be able to provide those to people at the end of this meeting. Thank you.